Hi, I'm Beth Schwenke, and this is my project for exercise physiology. The article that I decided to do was Physiological Responses of Young Thoroughbred Horses to Intermediate High-Intensity Treadmill Training. When training a young thoroughbred for racing, the trainer needs a set balance of cardiopulmonary function and aerobic capacity development in the horse while training. Since the training starts when the horses are at their prime development of their musculoskeletal system, lameness is a very serious matter because the training can be very demanding. Most young horses need to have a developed aerobic capacity in order for them to become good racehorses. For this test, treadmills were used so the horse does not have to bear the weight of the rider but still have their exercise controlled. This article introduces how supplementing high-intensity treadmills into the conventional racetrack training can reduce the chance for lameness while improving aerobic capacity. First, the horses need to be trained. As stated before, when training young horses, it needs to be done gradually to prevent injuring the horse since they are going through a major growing period. Training or breaking starts in autumn during their 1-year-old year. This is when the horse is starting to get used to being handled and ridden. After the training is over, then the level of intensity starts to increase. Then a horse can go into endurance training, which is a low-intensity exercise that includes trotting and slow cantering, which improves aerobic capacity. In this experiment, they use treadmills to enhance exercise too. Treadmills are normally used just for clinical evaluation or research. They are easy to control exercise intensity by changing the incline and the speed. Second, while the researchers performed this study, they had certain methods they had to follow. In this study, they tested 12 thoroughbreds, 7 males and 5 females. They were trained to run with an open flow mask while running on a treadmill. They were then randomly split into 3 groups, which consisted of horses trained only under saddle, was the control group, or C, short group, S, trained with intermediate high intensity exercise on the treadmill, which happened once a week for 2 months, and long group, which was L, that trained with intermittent high-intensity exercise on a treadmill for 8 months weekly. When training on the track with the saddle and rider, they began on an oil sand track at a trot and slow canter. The speed at which they ran was less than 10 meters per second, and a total distance around 1,600 to 2,400 meters during their yearling year. As time progressed into the end of their yearling year, their distances improved to 2,400 to 4,000 meters at speeds around 10 meters per second. Speeds increased to 13.5 meters per second for distances around 1,000 meters after February of their 2-year-old year. Just like the C group, the S and L group had the same training on the track, but also once a week they trained on the treadmill with a high-intensity exercise. If the horses ran on the treadmill, they were not ridden on the track on the same day. They ran at a 6% incline once a week by both groups. When the horses ran on the treadmill, the speed was set to obtain exhaustion between 2.5 to 3 minutes. The treadmill was increased by 0.5 meters per second the next week if the horse ran over that 3 minutes. The researchers also had veterinarians look at the horse at least once a week to see if they were showing signs of lameness. The veterinarians did this by observing the horse as it was being led at a walk or trot on a hard surface on the treadmill. Another element the researchers had to take into account was what they had to measure. The researchers decided to do 3 exercise tests to measure oxygen transport variables for each individual horse. They tested this in June of the yearling year for L only, October of the yearling year, and April of the 2nd-year-old year. When performing these tests, the horses needed to run at a steady rate to quantify oxygen transport variables to a speed that stimulated their maximum rate of oxygen consumption, otherwise known as VO2 max. The procedure started out as a warm-up, which consisted of 1.8 meters per second for 2 minutes and 3 meters per second for 3 minutes. Then that was followed by a 2-minute exercise with intervals at 1.8, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, and 13 meters per second, with the treadmill inclined at 6%. The test ended when the horse could not continue at the same position at the front of the treadmill. During the test, the horse wore an open flow mask that measured oxygen consumption in the open flow mask looks like the one here, and electrocardiogram electrodes for measuring heart rate. When the horse passed each speed and after coming to a steady reading of VO2, blood samples were drawn from arterial and mixed venous to measure blood hemoglobin concentration, oxygen saturation, and oxygen concentration. At the ending of training in April, the running velocity that obtained a heart rate of 200 beats per minute was measured by having the horses run at a 800 meter circular indoor oil sand track. A heart rate meter was used to measure the heart rate during exercise. The speed that they were running was calculated by dividing the distance traveled by the elapsed time. First, they warmed up at a trot for 800 meters, then ran for 800 meters at 4 different speeds. After the tests were completed, the researchers got to interpret what the results meant. During the experiment, there was no horses that experienced lameness. In all the groups, the running speeds increased after training. In April, at the final test, both groups, S group was 13.5 meters per second, L group was 13.4 meters per second, that used the treadmill were higher than the C group, which was 12.9 meters per second. While the VO2 max in the groups differed, the highly aerobic horses came from the L group, and the S and C groups were not that different from each other. Between October through April, the maximum heart rate decreased by an average of 10.8 beats per minute, and there was no difference between all groups. And this is where I'm getting the information from this table. During October through April, the VO2 max increased 1.9 gallons per dilution on average for all groups. In October, there was no difference between the groups, but the L group was higher than C and S by April. After 8 months of training, the L group was increased by a total of 3.4 gallons per dilution. Arterial oxygen concentration increased by 3.7 milliliters of oxygen over the whole training period. The arterial oxygen saturation did not differ between groups. The mixed venous oxygen concentration in the L group averaged 0.9 milliliters of oxygen per dilution, less than C and S, but was only significant in October. The saturation of mixed venous oxygen differed between treatments, but in comparison, the L group was considerably lower than C and S. The conclusion for this study proved that young horses that are trained with a conventional track exercise routine with a mixture of weekly high-intense treadmill running increases the horse's demand for metabolic power by at least an increase of 32% in aerobic capacity than those trained on just the track. Throughout this research, no horses experienced lameness. So overall, by having horses trained on the track and treadmill will cause less chance of a horse becoming lame and a significant increase in aerobic capacity. And that is it for my presentation. Thanks for listening.